Welcome back, everybody. It is Bored All the Time. Scott and I, hi Scott,
Hey, Mark.
are doing a special review episode. We were lucky enough to get in contact with Hobby World, and we met with them at Gen Con, and we were very graciously provided copies of Intent to Kill and Neon, and we are here to review both of those games.
We just found out as of recently, because we found out this from Hobby World, that Intent to Kill is very hard to get right now. So we definitely got lucky.
Yes, we did. And we were trying to track down Neo Dreams as well. Hopefully we'll be able to come across a copy of that in some way, shape, or form in the future. I'm still very excited about that one.
Oh yeah, looks great.
But we came into these two games. Both of us had very high expectations. And I think we have come away from both of them with very different opinions from each other.
Yes, exactly.
I do want to say at the top of it, I believe that there's an audience for both games.
Oh, very much so. I think our listeners have heard us talk about that we are too agreeable. There was some critiques that we are way too agreeable. The whole thing is I do want to touch upon this real quick. The reason why we're so agreeable with each other is because I know what you like, you know what I like, and when we're in that genre, we sit there and we're like, yeah, this is your stuff. I'm going to talk about it just as my personal opinion and not be contradictory or negative. There's no reason to be
Purposelessly negative.
right. Especially if it's a game that is not in my wheelhouse. These are the reasons why I don't. There's nothing negative to the game because it's not a game I enjoy. Now, if it was a roll and write, I could have a negative review on it.
That's fair, but I also think that we try to come in with the understanding of even if we do not particularly like something in the game or is not for us, very rarely will we ever just look at each other and say, that is a distinctly bad game. There is no audience for this. There's no person for this. It's something we talked about of know your audience. And based on the audience that we have, both with the podcast as well as our gaming groups, I think both of these games fit very naturally into our wheelhouse to talk about in review.
The game that I'm favoring more than the other one, I know exactly who I'm going to play this game with.
Yeah. For our process, since this is our first true full-blown review episode, bear with us. We are experimenting a little bit. I have some old school written reviews on Board Game Geek, and there's some more coming out on the website, which life got crazy, so outside the contact page, the website is still in process. But the format we are operating under is... I very cutely decided to call it the Glacier format because acrostics are the best.
And then he told me the whole thing, and it's actually Glacier O, but it's okay.
Or Glacierf. But, when you are building a acronym or an acrostic, you just ignore the letters you don't need.
Yeah, exactly.
We are going to be breaking down the game across 7 characteristics in 3 categories. The first category is just simply about the game, so gameplay and learning curve. Then we're going to move into production, and that's art and theme, components, and iconography. And then the function of the game as it stands with ease of teach and replayability. And then it comes down into our final opinions, or overall opinions, whatever you want. So with that, let's go ahead and get into our reviews.
Alright, Bat Family, I'm starting first with the game Intent to Kill. Basically, 2 teams are divided up between the serial killer and the detective. There are 20 suspects / victims on the board over 9 different factions, and the killer is on the board. You have selected it randomly. You have 6 to 8 motives that are used. 2 different modes of gameplay, logic or intuition. Lots of fun different options there. And then it happens over 5 to 6 rounds of, honestly, murder. Failure to have the killer kill 2 victims means the detective did their job and figured out how to keep you from doing your job, and you lose. If the detective can figure out the killer and the motive before the end of the 5th round of murder, they win. Otherwise, the killer gets away scot-free.
Yeah, and it should be noted that the detective must get both identity and motive.
Now, there is fun things in there, that there is a faction that is on the side of the killer, which means there can be up to 4, 5 people, if you shuffle really poorly, that are on the killer's side, which they give false information. They always lie, and you, as the killer, can lie or choose to tell the truth.
The difference in the gameplay modes, logic and intuition, there's not a whole ton of difference. I think it's actually somewhat of a misnomer to call the intuition mode intuition, because it felt very similar to me in the sense that in the logic mode, you are going on a tighter route of actions as a detective, where the intuition mode gives essentially special powers through a deck of cards for both sides.
Yeah, both sides has a deck of cards that get used. Also, there's more motives that the killer has. So there's more information that the detective has to suss out.
It's definitely the more advanced of the two modes. If we're going into the learning curve,
Yeah, let's slide right into there.
I think logic is easier to make sense of. There's a reason why that is the initial setup in the front of the book. It's all that.
Yeah, your logic is the beginning stages, figuring out how to play the game. You slide over to intuition once you've played logic a couple times. And then there's even scenarios. So like when you're really comfortable, you can play scenarios.
The ability to understand how to actually learn the game, what your actions are, what you were doing, all makes very good sense. There is a very nice, essentially, player aid on the board itself that you're probably going to aim at the detective instead of the murderer, but it's going to break down the 3 phases, what you're going to do in each phase, all that stuff. The player aid cards in the box are good. It's weird that the intuition only has 1 and the logic has 2, but we made it work. Beyond that, I think actually learning the game does make sense. I didn't have any moments where I really sat there and thought, wait, what am I doing? It all gelled together quickly. What really was more surprised me is, oh, this is as little of action as I have. But actually learning the game felt very quick.
Agreed. I happened to be the killer when we tested this, and both modes were very, very easy.
When we were learning, you played the murder each time, and I played the detective because that's just the way our brains seem to work better in those roles.
Exactly.
You were able to play the detective with a different player.
Yes, I did. For me, the murderer is a little easier in all sense. I'm just following the rules of my cards. So depending on what you get, depends on how much free reign you have. In fact, the last game that we played, I had free reign for 2 rounds because I just had to eliminate 3 in the same social group. So as long as my 5th one was my 3rd of that social group, I was in the clear. I really enjoy some of that flexibility.
I know the one game we played, I had your motive by the end of round 1.
Oh, yeah, because I just happened to hit the wrong spot. I wasn't even paying attention.
Between that, me being able to pay attention and notice some things, we were able to both pick up what were good moves and what were our mistakes very quick. So I think learning curve, no question.
Yeah, learning curve is very easy in this game.
Let's move on into production.
Yeah.
And that, starting in our acrostic, is going to be art and theme. And I am very positive that is what drew us to this immediately when we were looking over the Gen Con preview list.
Yeah, this is set in the 1960s, so you've got sepia tone pictures on one side, they're full color on the other side. The artwork very reminiscent of the 1960s, down to the little token that they use for the car. The board is a gorgeous map. Personally, I was surprised how much detail is in the map for the board. The components are really nice.
I really liked the art in this. Each of the civilian cards, and there is a good amount of them. There's
54.
So you're looking at 6 different from each faction in there, and they all look and feel very distinct, but you also just on a quick glance were able to look at them and see, oh, they're part of the press, they're part of the government. Great. There is no question about who they were or what they were doing. My favorite of the civilian cards is the actress, because she is very much that Elizabeth Taylor and Cleopatra. And so you have that quick connection. You understand, oh, that's probably what she is. But there's also just that thematic tie back of what a good reference. The art on this is just stunning. I really, really think that is one of the high points of the game for me.
Oh, yeah, you can't deny that the theme was really thought of well when you look at those cards. Even the detective and murder cards, those were done very, very well because they have the photography that is of that era, and those are on the cards as well.
All the actions made thematic sense within those decks.
Yes.
For one of the detective cards, for instance, is curfew, and that one just says pick an age group or a social group, and they're not allowed to be out at night.
Nope.
So the murderer now doesn't have access to them. Now, that is a very strong card that gives the murderer an extra card, but it's a neat mechanism where they managed to implement that all the way through.
On the reverse side, the murderer has a riot. So I can choose that exact same thing, saying you can't talk to that social group or that age group because they're rioting. And that card also gives the detective a card. Very fantastic.
We like the art. We like the theme.
Yeah.
Componentry. if we're looking at it as a whole, I do think you are getting a good amount out of this box because it's fairly inexpensive comparatively.
Yes.
I believe it's somewhere in the $40 range.
Yeah, I think it was like 40, 45, yeah.
Huge stack of cards, huge stack of victims.
Yep.
You have all of the building cutouts and
The detective marker, the social group tokens, those are all nice, thick cardboard. And not like cheap cardboard. Like it's got some weight, it'll hold up in the gameplay.
even though they are standees that use those clear base clips we've been used to using since Pawns all the way back in 13 Dead and Drive,
Yeah.
there's no marking on the buildings or the car. It's
Yeah.
actually very well produced in that sense. I do want to mention the rulebook here.
Yeah.
I have some issues with the rulebook.
Okay.
Now, I have not read this thing front to back because I had you teach it to me.
Yep.
But I have flipped through it enough for the rules, and I did the setup for intuition.
Yeah,
the
you
one
went to
time.
set it up this time.
And I understand why they have it set up the way they do, especially since Logic is supposed to be the essentially base mode of the game. But it really annoys me that you have the Logic mode rules and then the rest of the game rules, and then after that, there's the intuition setup, and then the scenarios after that. It's annoyingly laid out for me because you still have to go back to the Logic setup when you're doing the intuition setup.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if we're going to have two different modes, just even if you're repeating yourself, repeat yourself.
Just repeat yourself.
Make it easier for the person who's buying your game.
Now, that said, the rules as presented, very clear.
Very
I didn't have any questions looking up an answer because this is a game that's relying on secrecy, so we did not want to ask each other questions because that would give something away. And being able to find my answer in there is very simple. There's a nice appendix page in there that describes how certain murder and detective cards work. And so that made it very easy. Oh, do I have a question on this? Great. That's exactly how it works. The cards themselves were well thought out with their explanations on card, but the fact that it's in there is a nice thing. Really, the only serious negative I have, and I mentioned it earlier, I don't know why there's not 2 player aid cards per mode.
Yeah, that was a little annoying.
It's a weird oversight.
Yeah, it's a weird one. The only other thing I can think of is the notebook, which was just a little bit bigger because my handwriting, not everyone's going to have that small of handwriting. It could be like another like half an inch on each side just to give it a little bit more room. I think that would be
It would
perfect.
still fit in the box
It would
easily.
still fit in the box easily enough and would be that sweet spot of, okay, I can write a little bit more information because the whole thing is I'm going to have to go back over my notes. It would allow me to have that space going, oh, this is where the lie happened. I have a little bit of space to jot my own notes to sit there like, oh, I need to re-ask this question.
And
stuff like that.
It sounds like a silly note. I hope it's not taken that way. But the notebook pages are this darker brown, and they give you a couple pencils in the box. Great. But the wrong lighting, or if you have particularly messy handwriting, they blend in.
Very much so.
I wish it was just white pages.
Yep, but then it works with the theme because it's the 60s and it's supposed to be that manila folder type of thing. And
So moving from components, which I think we both say we're both very happy with.
yes,
Iconography. How easy is it to interpret and use the symbology within the game?
yeah, I find it's relatively easy, especially when you're looking at the civilian cards, because there is 9 icons for each type of civilian group of the social groups that they're in. They're also individually colored. So ease of use for a person who happens to be colorblind or anything along those lines is perfect for them. You know, you can sit there and tell, oh, hey, this is a person who is part of the jet set. They are female because you can see those symbols relatively well enough. You can tell if they are small, medium, or large build. You can tell their height. You can get their age. The print on that is perfect. So like all the iconography on the cards, I think is great. And on the buildings. You know, when you slide up to the diner, that's an ice cream cone, I'm going to do my diner action here.
Yeah, they did a really great job with pairing readability with design, with the understanding that there are going to be accessibility needs for color-based issues. One of the things I really like is when you're looking at the height icon, you see the meeple and they stretch the meeple on the icon, but there's also 1, 2, or 3 lines behind it as though they are standing against a height chart in a mugshot. So it's a really well designed that way. The genders are,
The classic.
yeah,
The Mars, the Venus symbols.
and they kept to a strict strict two gender just because it made it easier. I think it makes sense.
In this theming, yes.
In this theming, it makes sense. It also is one of those, it keeps that to a binary of what you need to learn.
I mean, most people are presenting one way or the other. So they're presenting female, they're presenting male. There you are. That's all you need to worry about.
Yeah, I think overall it worked very well. And when you're playing in the intuition mode, the detective has these extra tokens. They match perfectly to the symbology that's on the buildings. There's no difficult interpretation there either.
Well, even the surveillance token that you have is the exact same symbol that is on the police station.
They managed to make it its own token. It's a nice size, and it is very easy to tell that that's what it goes to, but it has its own function.
Yes.
One of the things that does help with this iconography is there's not a ton of it. There doesn't need to be a ton of it. It all works very well. I think this is a game that you can look at, and there was some time in between some of our play sessions, a few weeks, and we were able to pick it up again immediately because we remembered what everything did.
Yep. Fantastic.
So into the more nebulous characteristics here. Easy to teach. You taught me this game. How would you have rated that? I know you taught it to multiple people. You've taught it in both modes. How would you call the ease of teach?
I think with the iconography, how easy it is able to figure out what goes where and who what belongs to. Matching system works very, very well. I think that helps. This is a little bit more of a complicated game. Personally, how I feel with an ease of teach, I'm not going to give this to a newbie person to play unless I know they like logic puzzles, because this is a very tight logic puzzle. It is very easy to slip up somewhere and ruin your game on both sides.
I do think it's worth noting that despite all the appearances and all the markers that it gives off for experienced gamers, this is not a hidden movement game.
No.
So that is something I think it is important to note in the teach of, as the killer, you can just be anywhere. And it ultimately doesn't matter for you. Positioning only matters for the detective. And that is the one thing that you did a really good job of making very clear the first time we played it. Because when I sat there, I'm like, oh wait, I'm not trying to track you down based on proximity to me. You were just on the board.
I'm represented in the city with a card. Can you figure out which card is me? I have free reign to run over all 16 squares. I honestly feel like if I was going to give it a scale, if I go like 1 to 10 on ease to teach, I'd say this is probably a solid 5. There's enough complexity that I need to make sure that you understand certain things, but it's still not a very long teach, which I think is great.
Yeah, because the murderer has very few things that they're doing, and the detective has very few things they're doing, but it's the interaction and the application of those choices of how you do it, that's where the game really lost.
Exactly. And I think once you have maybe, we talked like for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes total, and we were going.
Yeah.
I think it was great.
So the last category, I think, is going to be fairly predestined outcome at this point. Replayability.
Yeah.
It's through the roof.
Oh, exactly.
You don't even have to touch either of the modes. You can just pick one. You don't have to pick the scenarios. You can just switch back and forth just the way the motives and the civilians come out. Different game every time.
Yes. It has a huge replay value. And you can come up with your own scenarios. You can sit there. You don't have to play how they have it. Choose your own motives. It's great. Like chef's kiss with that whole replay value.
So, Scott, let's go ahead and move into our final thoughts on Intent to Kill. Why don't you start us off?
I loved so much about this game. I know when we got to Gen Con and we saw it, this was on my list before we hit Gen Con. When I saw it, I went, oh, this is like Clue Senior, because I'm getting to play as the murderer and I get to choose who's my Mr. Body. Great. This is awesome. That being said, with the information that we have given you and how much I do really enjoy this, if we're going to look at a 10-point scale, this is easily an 8 for me.
So I'm coming in significantly lower. What this game ultimately cemented for me is I do not have a good time playing competitive deduction games.
Yes.
Hidden movement games and games of its ilk are a genre I do not like because they always take way too long for what they are. We stated this is not a hidden movement game, but it puts you in that same thought space of I need to suss out the other person. I need to be very cognizant of what I'm doing and more so of what they are doing. My issue with the game is the same that I have with something like Cryptid, where both sides need to be operating perfectly. The detective and the murderer, but especially the detective, has to understand all the rules, because if there is a mistake in their understanding, that affects the deduction. On the flip side, and this is very much on the murderer, they have to be giving perfect information, because if they screw up, the whole thing's shot. And so that gives the game a fragility that I don't particularly like. The one thing that we kind of glossed through, and it is the major reason that I have an issue with the game, is your information that you're sussing as the detective is not perfect. Because even though all the information is available to you on the board, the murderer is going to lie. There's a group of people that will lie. Mm-hmm. And you don't have enough time as the detective, I feel, to be able to accurately get both the motive and the murderer. The detective's turn, you're able to take 2 actions. Depending on how the board works, or like you mentioned earlier about how there can be that unfortunate reality that, hey, you just happen to get 5 of a single group and they're all on your side. There's some unevenness in that frustrates me. What ultimately cost me the game a few different times is I went to question and I was able to build a perfect theory. I was able to perfectly get the motive. Mm-hmm. And I just so happened to, unfortunately, get the murderer.
And the murderer can choose to lie or tell the truth.
And it completely sunk me. The one game we played, I never had a way to compare against who the supporting group was, because he killed them all at the start. And so I was then under the auspice of somebody has to be lying to me. And I couldn't ever figure that out, because the only person left was the murderer.
Yeah.
Take that for what it stands for me. I think the game is beautiful. I think the game is engrossing. I think the game is easy to learn, easy to teach. It has a strong rule book. It's a 5.
For you, I wouldn't expect anything higher.
This is a game that, even though it scales up, I think it is best at 2 people.
Very much so.
This is very much a game that you want to enjoy, that cat and mouse, one brain versus one brain, back and forth thing. If you do not like stressful games, if you don't like that pressure or that tension, you will have a bad time with this, because you are constantly feeling the press of how much time do I have left. And I will say, on a thematic note, and one of the reasons I think the theme is so strong as it stands, is one of the games we played, I thought I had you in round 3. Mm-hmm. And I almost called it in round 3, because my brain sat there and told me, if another round happens, somebody else is going to die, and I can't let somebody else die.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it's silly, right? It's a card, you flipped it over, and I had to struggle with it. I don't know if you noticed it at the end of that round.
Yeah.
It was because I'm sitting there thinking, I have the motive. I'm pretty sure I have the murderer, but if I get one more, I can probably get this.
I flipped my card over and you went, huh, like I almost punched you in the gut. I don't want to spoil it, but I kind of want to. It was Homemade Bomb. Mm-hmm. And it literally wipes out everyone in one block. And I got rid of 3 people. One of them was my target.
Yeah.
And you went, oh, I had you as that. And I went, oh,
yeah,
I just destroyed what you were thinking, and now you are backpedaling real quick.
And so now I'm sitting there with a pile of bodies in front of me and thinking, I don't want anybody else to go.
Because there's 20 people on the board. One is mine.
Yep.
So 19 potential victims, and in round 3, there was 5 bodies.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think it is a well-made game, as a tight game. For me, it is the wrong game, because for me, this is the wrong genre.
I will be blatantly honest. After reading the book and having played it the very first time, which it wasn't with you, mm-hmm. I knew that this wasn't your game.
Yeah.
Just because we're friends and we know each other really well. So I'm sorry you did not enjoy it. I will enjoy it with other people.
In Neon, you are a gladiatorial fighter as backed by a mega corporation in the cyberpunk future in the city of Neo Nagoya in the Neon Gladiatorial Leagues. You are a fighter that has come in, and your goal is to be the last one standing or a member of the last team standing, so that way you can bring glory to your megacorp. It's a grim theme, but it's well executed on, because within the game, you are going to be handed a deck of cards, and you are going to have 3 cards in hand at the start of each of your turns, and each card is going to have a half divided with 2 actions on them, as well as an initiative number. And you are going to choose what actions you are going to take as based on the way you overlay the cards. This is a similar mechanism to another Hobby World Arcane Wonders game of Smartphone Inc., where if you are used to overlaying your paddles, that's essentially what you're doing here. And what's interesting is because you are forced to overlay the cards, that means even though there are 4 actions on the 2 cards, you're only going to take 3 of them. Whatever the initiative number on top of the overlaid card is, that is going to be an initiative order that you run at, and the lower your number, the faster you're going to move in the round. And sometimes that matters, other times it does not. The actions are fairly straightforward. Moving around the arena, searching for items, attacking somebody, or potentially using a special ability on your character sheet. Each character does have unique abilities that allow them to feel slightly different from each other. What is going to be happening is you are going to be finding gear in the arena. That's going to be an array of weaponry, an array of defensive items. You are going to try and take out your opponents. Depending on the mode you're playing in, you are either going to try and be the last person standing or be the only person still on the arena, if that's possible. Because one of the really cool things about Neon is the board itself. And we'll get into this during the production, but the arena is going to be constantly shrinking. It steals that from modern Battle Royale games where you are going to be losing sections of the board as things go, which means you're going to be forced into fights with each other as the game progresses. There are 3 gameplay modes. There's Resurrection, where you essentially get a bonus life, Battle Royale, where you don't have that bonus life, and then a squad mode, which is team-based. Despite the fact there is a fighter in the game called Atoma, it is not actually used for solo. It is simply a 2-player bot. Take that as you will. With that, Scott, the learning curve. I taught you this one. How did you feel it was to pick the game up?
It felt very easy to learn, in all honesty. When you're sitting there coming from the world of smartphone, doing that whole layer on top of card, I thought was perfect. It was, the cards are completely tell you what actions you're going to be able to take, and you go left or right. Not much more than that. I thought it was very simple to learn. I didn't have a lot of questions once we got done with that teach. And it wasn't a very long teach at all.
It wasn't. For being one of those, the rule book is the size of the box things, it actually is a quick one to read through and a quick one to understand. I know when I was playing, there are games where I will be sitting down and thinking, okay, I have to monitor the teach and my game is going to suffer, but I have to do that. I didn't feel that with this game where there's like everything makes sense. So I guess let's go into the art and theme while we're talking about this, because essentially this is a third-person shooter where you are finding guns and you are finding your armor and doing all the fun things. There's some really cool melee weapons that you're going after. It all just gels of, if I am moving, I know that I am going somewhere else in the arena. If I'm attacking you, I get to pick which of my weapons I'm attacking you with.
It very much felt like, oh, I'm looking at scenes from Blade Runner, Tron. Even the names of some of the objects were from pop culture references that fit within the theme of what this game is having. It really does a really great job.
I really like the art. It's that bright neon, so grim dark that you want out of a strong cyberpunk theme, and I think that is presented well. Moving into components, this is a mixed bag for me.
Agreed.
The player boards themselves are a little thin. They do what they need to do. There's one of those slider clips to track your energy. They're flimsy.
Yes.
They're thin. If you are not hard on them, I think it's going to be fine. They are good through that. But if a kid gets at it, or if you are just more of a heavy-handed gamer, it's going to be tougher to get to.
Agreed.
The actual cardboard tokens are fine. Nothing to really write home about. As far as the playboard itself, there are the arena areas, which are a nice sturdy cardboard, and I think these are actually going to hold up well, even with stomping miniatures on them and all that stuff. I think these are going to hold up well. The one thing that is a little dicey for me is the central platform. When we finished playing the game, I know a few of us have had different conversations about this. The platform itself is both obnoxious and awesome.
Yes.
Because it is a 4-piece fold that you have to put together. Actually, I think it's 6 pieces because I believe there's something that holds it up top as well. You have to assemble it and break it down. at the end of every game.
Yeah.
There's no way it's going to fit in the box assembled. It's a bummer because that means it's going to wear out.
Yep.
And it is divided into 4 sections, which you would feel like it means something, and it doesn't. So it's one of those, it's designed that way because that's the way you produce it.
I wish it had more function.
But the function that is there, because anytime you start the game or you respawn in resurrection mode, you come out on that. To determine what portion of the arena is going to fall away, there's actually a set of circular tokens. And it's really interesting because the game will tell you, hey, there's going to be a single sector that falls, there's going to be 2 sectors that fall. And if there's 2, you don't know what the second one's going to be because it's covered. But because this platform elevates it into the air, it is always visible. It is always a point of awareness. And it's also, it just tells the importance of, hey, like if you're standing in sector 9 and sector 9 is going to sink at the end of the round, plan for that. And there are ways to plan for it, but you better be aware.
Yeah, you better be aware it's going to happen because it's going to happen. For me, when looking at the design of this, it reminded me of a buoy.
Sure.
It just looked like a buoy. For whatever reason, that took me out.
And it's supposed to be the drop ship.
Is that what it's supposed to be?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't get it. So I literally looked at it and was like, oh, okay, that's right. It's going to drop into the water. Okay, that's why it's a buoy. And I never was able to break away from it. And I mean, it worked, but yeah, it took me a little out of the theming for it.
That's fair. So the iconography. So we didn't touch on the dice.
Nope.
Which I really like the dice, actually.
Oh, they're great dice.
They're very pretty.
They're neon blue, they're bright neon pink, and they're completely translucent with sharp, crisp white inking so that you can see the icon. I mean, we have them in the middle of the table right now, and I can tell what all those icons are. I know exactly what you rolled if that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, there's no question about what's there, which is very nice. One of the things that I did find to be a difficulty, and it's something that we in multiple matches had an issue with, each sector has its own special power that is generally going to reference one of the dice tokens. It can be really easy to miss that that's there. And so while the iconography is clear, it can be easy to miss some of the uses of that. But otherwise, the other real set of iconography that we haven't mentioned is on the weaponry and on the equipment. 3 types of ammunition icons. One of the really neat aspects of the game is when you are using your weaponry, you're able to get a certain amount of dice out of it, but similar to the way the old Gears of War game did it, actually, you were able to expend an ammo type and get an extra special effect out of it. That could be you puncture through armor, or you get extra dice, or you get to turn the conditional misses into hits, whatever they are. That system of being able to load the gun just by tucking a card under it and knowing that those icons match what's there, I think that is a really good system. It's very smart. It is different shapes, so they do look different from each other. I don't think it's really color accessible. It's red, green, and blue when you're looking at those icons, but the shapes are unique enough that I don't think that's really an issue.
Yeah, the only other problem that I have is that the print on these cards are a little small.
Yeah.
So if you happen to be older like me, I do not have readers yet. Obviously, I now need to go get them if I want to continue playing this game. Because, yeah, this print is relatively small. I love the graphics. Art is great. I wish it was either a little bit smaller or faded a little bit. Like they just like faded into the background a little bit so that the print and the icons were a little bit bigger. I think I would love this a little bit more.
Into the ease of teach, we cover this during the learning curve. I think that's going to be just inherent to how we talk about these. It is a very straightforward teach. It is fun to be able to teach because it helps to just grab a couple of minis, throw them on some sectors, and explain how the cards work. The player boards themselves are all laid out identically, even with the asymmetry within them, so it's easy to say, hey, here's your health structure, here's the basic abilities that everybody has, here are your particular unique ones. The only thing that was a little was some of the fighters have special tokens that only they use, and the only place that is listed is actually on the player board itself. So if you're going through and you're looking in the rule book for who gets what, or you're trying to find it paired off, that's not there. So beyond that small little thing of, hey, if you're playing Akari, she has the cat token, you just kind of got to know that that's there. Now, you could be a crazy person like the way I am, and the way that I bag up components. I give everybody all their player components together. But if you're not that way, then that could complicate the teach a little bit. But it's quick. I don't even think it took 10 minutes. I think we were closer to 5 minutes for the teach, and then we were just playing.
This is definitely one of those games where you learn more by playing than actually sitting there and trying to go over the rule book or look at this card and this is the iconography that's on this card. Just play it. You're going to learn while you're playing it. It's that easy of a game.
Replayability.
When it comes to replayability, now mind you, there is 10 platform sections. So, I mean, they can be put in a multitude of ways, but I don't really feel like it changes the game that much on how the sections are. There are 6 different characters, and yes, you can rotate through those characters, but I don't feel like this has a huge replay factor unless you like third-person shooters or the Neo Tokyo genre.
I can't disagree. I think while the way the game board lays out gives some modicum of difference, end of the day, it doesn't really matter because
you're going to lose them.
Number 9 says, during defense, you treat all your shields as misses. Cool. If that goes away in round 1, you're never going to experience it. And even if it lasts to being one of the last sectors on the board, maybe you never went there. So
yeah, I know there was a sector when we were playing that when we were down to 3, none of us had touched it. We bounced between the 2 for the majority of the game.
I think this gets into the reason why I think the replayability on this is actually pretty low is the balance is off in the game. There are just strictly better player abilities and platform powers than others.
Yeah.
One of the ones that when Jake played the game, he had one that it would have cost 4 energy and it had to be a very specific scenario for it to trigger. Never worked. He never used it. Another character I used was able to throw a token in her sector, and if you stepped into it, it blew up and hurt you.
We just avoided it.
You just avoided it because unless you're going in with melee weapons, you know, it's just, okay, I'm just going to step away for a round. One of the other knocks against it for replayability is player count. That I don't think it scales particularly well at any point. On the lower end, you're going to be taking turns quicker, but you're not going to be seeing as much stuff. There's not going to be as much chaos. There's that issue around it. Whereas if you are playing in the higher player counts, more cards, more weapon, more shots being taken, all the stuff, but the game length stretches out significantly. And so I think if you're playing it at 3 or 4 players. You don't really want to go to either end.
Oh my gosh, could you imagine if we were playing with a full squad? I'm attacking you. What are the other 4 players doing? They're sitting there.
So let's go into final thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I think what you hit on needs to be mentioned as well is that unless you are specifically using ability that says so, you're only ever single targeting. So if I am attacking into a sector with 4 people, I am only attacking you. That's a bummer. The weaponry choices don't feel different or better in any way. The purple deck is clearly the best, but it's not like it is some huge upgrade. You don't feel like I have an epic piece of gear. You think like, oh, I have a gun that shoots 4 dice instead of 3 dice.
Right. And even when if you're playing the resurrection mode and you die and you come back, you're supposed to get a special power. I looked through them. They were relatively lackluster. Okay, yeah, this is cool power, but then you're like, this is only going to affect me if I died really early.
Yeah. And that gets into my final points about it is Battle Royale mode is just the better way to play because the resurrection mode is too long.
Yes.
It just is. And for me, squad mode was fun, but I found that means I am now getting extra stuff in my weaponry, but my target pool just shrank. And that's a bummer. Each time I walked away from it, I was the one that was the most positive. I think there is good bones here. The game looks very interesting on the table.
Yes.
Somebody's going to walk over and be like, what are you playing?
Yep.
That goes a long way. I think the art is strong. I think the cards themselves are clear and they make a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, I think the best rating I can give this is a 6. It's almost there. I think you could leave the majority of the components the same and just do a second pass on balancing the items and a potentially revamped rule set, I think there is a strong game buried in an otherwise okay game. I would give it a 6.
You give it a 6. For me, 5. I think it definitely needs a revision, an expansion, a something. We can have some asymmetry, but give me those things that are going to be asymmetrical, things I want to use and strive for. Then you've got a game that I really want to play.
Yeah.
Right now, as it sits, yeah, it's like a 5.
I would not turn down a game of this if somebody said, hey, we got this new cool game called Neon. I want to learn it. Let's play it. I could sit down and I could have a good time with this. So those are our 2 reviews from the games that were provided to us, again, by Hobby World. And I think we came away with some good memories out of both of them. I think Intent to Kill is going to live on your shelf forever.
I mean, it's my alternative to Clue, and we all know how much I like Clue.
Yeah. It's a very strong game.
Yes.
I wish I liked the genre more, but I can easily recommend that to many people.
Yeah, looking at Neon, I had a great time playing Neon because of the people I was with. I could have had just a great time playing something else as well.
And I think the biggest thing I can drop against Neon is really what we've said about other games like this in the past. It is a good game. Mm-hmm. In the market we are in, good is not good enough.
Correct.
You have to be great.
You have to be great.
If you just like that cyberpunk theme, if you want that big, bright, colorful thing, if you want a unique looking board, if you want cool dice, there's a lot in the box to like. I would love a second pass at it. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, I really enjoyed getting to go through and review all these.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what new stuff the Hobby World can come up with.
Absolutely. Well, with that, Scott, as per usual, I am super bored of you.
I've already left.
Then we're not going to play some games.
Fine, we won't.